Okay, so get this, our deep dive today
Mm-hmm.
is about a deal that was struck in the 1930s
Okay.
between Nazi Germany
Wow.
and the Zionist movement.
Oh, wow.
You heard that right?
Yeah.
It's called the Havara Agreement.
Mm.
And it's really one of those things in history that just makes you go, huh.
Yeah. It's definitely a head-scratcher.
Yeah.
It seems impossible.
Yeah, like how...
On the surface.
Totally.
As a most unlikely partnership imaginable.
So we're using a YouTube video by Paul Nabil Massis for this one.
Okay.
It's called Start Here, Palestine 16, Transfer the Havara Agreement and Anti-Nazi Boycott of the 1930s.
Okay.
And he really digs into all the twists and turns of this
Right.
to set the scene. It's 1933.
Okay.
Hitler and the Nazi Party are in power in Germany,
Mm-hmm.
and their whole platform is built on anti-Semitism,
Right.
with expelling Jews from Germany as a core goal.
Of course. So the world reacts.
Yep.
Jewish communities everywhere are leading boycotts of German goods.
Right.
But here's where it gets really interesting. Some Zionist organizations were actually against this boycott.
Wait, against it?
Yeah.
That seems counterintuitive.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah, what was their reasoning?
Well, to understand that, you have to understand the situation that the Zionist movement was in.
Okay.
They were trying to establish a Jewish homeland in Palestine.
Right.
But the British, who control Palestine under a mandate from the League of Nations,
Mm-hmm.
are limiting Jewish immigration
Oh.
because of tensions with the Arab population.
Right.
Plus, within the Zionist movement itself,
Yeah.
there are different groups with different ideas on how to reach their goals.
So you've got the British trying to keep the peace,
Yeah.
the Zionist movement figuring out its next steps,
Uh-huh.
and then you throw the Nazis into the mix.
Exactly. It's a lot of moving parts.
Well, it is.
On top of that, you have German Jews that are desperate to leave,
Yeah.
but they can't easily take their assets with them. It's a mess.
Yeah.
And then comes this Havara agreement. This deal that on paper
Mm-hmm.
seems to offer a solution for everyone involved.
Okay, let's break this down.
Sure.
What exactly did this agreement involve?
Well, the Havara agreement essentially allowed German Jews to transfer some of their wealth to Palestine
Okay.
by buying German goods.
So instead of just leaving their money behind,
Right.
they could use it to purchase German products,
Exactly.
which would then be shipped to Palestine and sold.
That's right.
So a way to get around the restrictions on taking money out of Germany.
Mm-hmm.
Clever.
Yeah.
But I bet it was controversial.
Oh, incredibly so.
Yeah.
Imagine being a Jewish person in this situation.
Yeah.
You're facing persecution.
Yeah.
Your life is being upended.
Yeah.
And then you have this option.
Yeah.
But it involves dealing with the very regime that's targeting you.
Talk about a moral dilemma.
It was a huge one.
Yeah,
And it caused a major rift within the Jewish community.
I bet.
Some people saw it as collaborating with the enemy,
Mm.
while others saw it as a lifeline, the only way to get out and support the growth of a Jewish homeland.
And within the Zionist movement itself,
Yeah.
how did those different groups we talked about earlier,
Mm-hmm.
Mapai, the more mainstream group,
Right.
and the revisionists who were more hardline,
Yes.
how did they feel about this agreement?
Well, Mapai, led by David Ben-Gurion,
Okay.
were the main proponents of the Havara agreement.
Okay.
They saw it as a pragmatic way to build up Palestine,
Mm-hmm.
even if it meant making deals with the devil, so to speak.
Right.
The revisionists, on the other hand, fiercely opposed any cooperation with the Nazis.
Yeah.
They saw it as a betrayal
Wow.
and even resorted to violence.
Really?
The assassination of Haim Arlusarov,
Oh, wow.
a key figure in Mapai,
Yeah.
is a stark example of how high the stakes were.
It's almost hard to believe that something like trading oranges for farming equipment could be so politically charged.
Well, this was just the beginning.
Right.
There's this fascinating story about a citrus company in Palestine called Hanotea, owned by a businessman named Sam Cohen.
Mm-hmm.
He actually made a deal with the Nazis to trade Jaffa oranges for German farming equipment.
Wow.
It was like a pilot program for the Havara Agreement,
Okay.
showing how German goods could be bought with blocked Jewish assets
Wow.
and sent to Palestine.
So this small deal paved the way for a much larger, more complex agreement.
Exactly.
It's amazing how these things develop.
And it's not just about the economics.
Okay.
There's another story about a Nazi SS officer named Leopold von Mildenstein.
Okay.
He actually traveled to Palestine
What?
with the help of a Jewish German lawyer and Zionist leader named Kurt Tuckler.
Okay.
His mission was to write articles for a Nazi newspaper painting the Zionist project in a positive light.
Positive.
Uh-huh.
That seems like a strange move for the Nazis.
It does, doesn't it?
What was their angle?
Well, think propaganda.
Okay.
By portraying themselves as pro-Zionist,
Okay.
they could claim they weren't anti-Semitic.
I see.
It was a way to deflect international criticism
Oh, okay. Yeah.
and present themselves as supporters of Jewish self-determination.
Right.
Just not in Germany.
Interesting tactic.
It was.
But beyond the political maneuvering, there's another layer to this whole story that's really unsettling.
Yeah.
The video talks about Arthur Ruppin,
Right.
a leading figure in the Zionist movement.
Yeah.
Often called the father of Jewish settlement in Palestine.
Mm-hmm.
And it turns out he was a supporter of race science and eugenics.
Yeah, that's where things get really complicated.
Yeah.
And what's even more unsettling is that these ideas weren't fringe.
Right.
They were shared by many in the Zionist movement at the time.
Wow.
Ruppin and others believed that Jews were a distinct race weakened by assimilation,
Okay.
and that creating a strong, racially pure Jewish nation in Palestine
Yeah.
was essential for survival.
It's unsettling to see how similar ideas about racial purity,
I know.
even with different targets, were circulating at the time. And it makes the collaboration with the Nazis, as disturbing as it is, a little easier to understand.
Right. They were both operating within this framework of racial thinking,
Right.
even if their ultimate goals were different.
And it gets even more jarring when you consider this quote from a Zionist thinker named Jacob Klatskin.
Okay.
If we do not admit the rightfulness of anti-Semitism, we deny the rightfulness of our own nationalism.
Wow.
That's a really tough statement to process today.
It is.
It just goes to show how deeply ingrained these racial concepts were
Right.
in the thinking of some Zionist leaders back then.
Yeah.
So we've got this complex web of motivations, ideologies, and political maneuvering.
Uh-huh.
Where do we go from here?
Well, despite all the controversy, the Havara Agreement did have a real impact.
Okay.
It brought money into Palestine
Mm-hmm.
and facilitated the immigration of skilled German Jews, who played a key role in building the foundations of what would become Israel.
Right.
But of course, it also raises a lot of ethical questions. How do you balance the practical benefits with the moral implications of working with a regime like the Nazis?
That's a question we'll have to explore further in our deep dive.
It's a question that becomes even more difficult to grapple with as we move into the mid-1930s,
Yeah.
and the Nazi policies become increasingly brutal.
Right, because it's not like the situation stayed static.
No, not at all.
Things were escalating rapidly.
Exactly. In 1935, the Nuremberg Laws are passed.
Right.
These laws stripped Jews of their German citizenship
Wow.
and imposed even harsher restrictions on their lives.
It seems like the Nuremberg Laws should have made the Zionist movement rethink their involvement with the Havara Agreement.
You'd think so, right?
Yeah,
But the response from the Zionist leadership was actually pretty muted.
really?
They were still focused on the practical benefits of the agreement,
Okay.
the influx of capital and skilled immigrants into Palestine.
So even in the face of these increasingly horrific policies,
Yeah.
they saw the Havara Agreement as essential to their goal of building a Jewish state.
It was seen as a necessary evil by some.
It makes you wonder about the calculations they were making,
Right.
the balance between pragmatism and morality.
Absolutely. And then just a few years later comes Kristallnacht,
Oh, yeah.
the Night of Broken Glass.
Right.
It was a wave of violence against Jews across Germany and Austria. Jewish businesses and synagogues were destroyed. Thousands of men were arrested, and nearly 100 people were killed.
Kristallnacht shattered any remaining illusions
Yeah.
that the Nazis could be reasoned with,
Right.
or that their actions were anything less than systematic persecution.
It certainly did. And as you might imagine,
Yeah.
it led to a huge surge in Jewish emigration from Germany.
Right.
But even then, the Zionist movement's focus remained on the development of Palestine.
Okay.
They prioritized the immigration of young, healthy individuals
Uh-huh.
who could contribute to building the nation.
It's almost like they were choosing who they would accept
Right.
based on
It's a very
ability to contribute.
tough thing to think about.
Yeah, it reminds me of this quote from David Ben-Gurion, who later became the first prime minister of Israel.
Okay.
He said, "Zionism is not primarily engaged in saving individuals."
Wow. That's a chilling quote.
Yeah.
That perfectly captures the mindset of the Zionist leadership at the time.
Yeah.
It wasn't about rescuing every individual.
Right.
It was about creating a Jewish state,
Right.
even if that meant making difficult choices along the way.
And it wasn't just a passive prioritization.
Yeah.
They actively opposed rescue efforts that didn't align with their vision.
Exactly.
Our source mentions the Kindertransport,
Right.
a program that brought Jewish children to safety in Britain.
And incredibly, the Zionist movement opposed it.
What?
They wanted those children to go to Palestine, not Britain.
It's hard to wrap your head around that.
Yeah.
Putting the future of a nation ahead of the immediate safety of children
It's definitely...
feels morally problematic, to say the least.
It raises a lot of ethical questions.
And it gets even more complex when you consider the Evian Conference of 1938.
Oh, yeah.
This conference was called to address the growing refugee crisis in Europe, with millions of Jews and other groups fleeing persecution.
Right. So a chance for the international community to step up and provide a solution.
Exactly.
Potentially. But here again, the Zionist movement played a controversial role.
Okay.
They insisted that Palestine be the only destination considered for Jewish refugees,
Really?
even though other countries were willing to take them in.
So that seems like a missed opportunity.
It was.
Closing off potential escape routes for those in desperate need.
It had a devastating consequence.
Yeah, right.
The conference ultimately failed to produce any meaningful action,
Oh, wow.
partly due to this insistence on Palestine as the sole solution.
So the Zionist movement's focus on Palestine,
Yeah.
while understandable given their goals,
Uh-huh.
actually limited options for Jewish refugees.
Right.
And contributed to the failure of a major international effort
Yeah.
to address the crisis.
It played right into the hands of the Nazi propaganda machine. Joseph Goebbels, the Nazi propaganda minister,
Right.
used the Evian Conference as proof that nobody cared about Jewish refugees,
Oh, wow.
except for Germany,
Wow.
who was generously allowing them to go to Palestine.
So their actions, while intended to help establish a Jewish homeland,
Right.
inadvertently strengthened the Nazi position
Yep.
and made things even worse for the very people they were trying to help.
It's a heartbreaking irony.
It really is. It highlights just how complex and morally ambiguous this period of history was.
It does.
So what happened to the Havara Agreement itself? Did
Right.
it continue throughout the war?
No, it actually came to an end in 1939, right before the outbreak of World War II.
Okay,
But its legacy is incredibly complicated,
I bet.
and something that historians continue to debate today.
On one hand, it helped to bring resources and people to Palestine, contributing to the eventual creation of the State of Israel. But on the other hand, it involved collaboration with a regime
Right.
that was carrying out a genocide against the Jewish people.
Exactly. It's a situation that doesn't fit neatly into categories of good and evil.
Right.
It forces us to confront the uncomfortable realities of history
Yeah.
and to recognize that even those with good intentions can sometimes make choices that have devastating consequences.
It also reminds us of the importance of perspective.
Yeah.
We're looking back on these events with the full knowledge of the horrors of the Holocaust.
Right.
But those involved in the Havara Agreement didn't have that hindsight.
Mhm.
They were making decisions in a world where the full extent of the Nazi threat was not yet known.
That's a crucial point.
Yeah.
It's easy to judge their actions from our modern perspective,
Right.
but it's essential to understand the context they were operating in.
They were trying to navigate an incredibly complex and dangerous situation.
Yes.
Caught between a rock and a hard place, so to speak.
Exactly.
But even with that understanding,
Yeah,
it's hard not to grapple with the ethical dilemmas
of course.
that the Havara Agreement presents.
Absolutely. And that grappling is important.
Yeah.
It's how we learn from history
Mm-hmm.
and hopefully avoid repeating the mistakes of the past.
Yeah, it really makes you think about the choices people make when faced with extraordinary circumstances,
It does.
especially when those choices involve compromising certain values
Right.
for a greater good or what they perceive to be a greater good.
And that's the heart of the matter, isn't it?
Yeah,
The Havara Agreement wasn't simply an economic transaction.
right.
It was a reflection of a deeply held belief within the Zionist movement.
Uh-huh.
The belief that establishing a Jewish state was the only way to ensure the survival and safety of the Jewish people.
So in a way, they saw the creation of Israel as a solution
Yeah,
to the very problem that the Nazis were exacerbating.
precisely. And
Yeah.
to achieve that goal, they were willing to make difficult and even morally questionable decisions.
Yeah.
It's a stark reminder that history is rarely black and white.
Mm-hmm.
It's full of shades of gray.
Right.
And understanding those nuances is crucial.
Our source, the video by Paul Nabil Mathis.
Yeah. Does a good job of highlighting these different shades.
He does.
He doesn't shy away from the uncomfortable aspects of the story.
Nope.
He presents the facts and allows viewers to draw their own conclusions.
And that's what makes this deep dive so valuable.
Right.
It's not about passing judgment. It's about understanding the complexities of the past.
Yeah.
And recognizing that even those we might consider heroes
Mm-hmm.
can make choices that we find troubling today.
It also forces us to ask ourselves some tough questions.
Right.
Knowing what we know now about the Holocaust, would we judge the decisions made by the Zionist leadership differently?
Yeah.
Could alternative actions have saved more lives?
Those are questions that historians and ethicists continue to grapple with.
Right.
And there are no easy answers.
Yeah.
But the very act of asking those questions, of engaging with this difficult history, is crucial.
Because it helps us to understand the forces that shape our world, both past and present.
And it reminds us that even in the darkest of times, there are always choices to be made, each with its own set of consequences.
So as we conclude this deep dive into the Havara Agreement, I think the most important takeaway is this.
Okay.
History is messy. It's complicated.
Yeah.
And it demands our attention.
Right.
Not for the sake of judgment,
Yeah.
but for the sake of understanding.
We need to acknowledge the uncomfortable truths, grapple with the ethical dilemmas,
Yes.
and ultimately learn from the past so that we can build a better future.
And perhaps that's the most fitting tribute we can pay to those who lived through those turbulent times.
Yeah.
To remember their stories, to learn from their struggles, and to strive for a world where such compromises are never necessary again.
That's a powerful message. So to our listeners, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.
Until next time.
See ya!